Hello. I feel so lucky to be featured by the Heartland Society of Women's Writers this week, and I'm really excited to share with you something new that I've begun to work on. Before reading, I'll give you a little background though. Um, when I work with students who want to be writers, one of the things I talk to them about is the idea of looking for things in their own lives and in their story ideas about which they say before and after. And by that, I mean, those moments when things changed, before an accident, before a death, after a death, something changed in your life that was, you might not have realized it at the time, or you might have realized it at the time, but everything was different afterwards. So that's a concept that I think is really useful and important in thinking about what you want to write. A big before and after for me was when my family moved from a city neighborhood to the suburbs in 1956, which was the summer just before I started the fourth grade. Um, I just was really unhappy after we moved, and I was pretty much unhappy after that forever, which I, in my own mind, sort of thought, well, I really think that's why. Now, in retrospect, I don't know whether that's true, but it certainly was a before and after, and it certainly was a huge change in my life. Um, Coming to the end of a book that I've been working on for quite some time, I started thinking that I'd like to write about that neighborhood in that moment of time, the mid to late 50s, and thinking about how to frame a story in that time and place. I remembered that when I was in the seventh grade, a few years after we moved, my English aunt and her little boy came to stay with us for nearly 2 years. And I thought about how much tension that created in our family that was already pretty precarious for a variety of reasons. So I started, started trying to write, and I just couldn't get anywhere with it as a work of fiction. I couldn't find a voice. I couldn't make the story get going. Um, and so I was really frustrated, and I thought, all right, I'll start an essay instead. I'll write an essay. If nothing else, I'll get an essay because I do really want to write about that time and place. But after a while, it began, as I hoped it would, it began to morph into fiction. So what I'm going to do is read you first a couple of pages of the essay, and then I'm going to read you a couple of pages of what I think will be the beginning of the novel. It's the beginning of the novel right now, but things change in process fairly frequently, and it might not end up being that way. So if you pick up the book years from now and it's not the beginning, it's just changed. So, all right, here we go. I gotta pull it up here. All right, here's the essay, and it begins with a quote from the brochure of the company of the company that built the houses in the neighborhood where I lived. It was called National Homes, which right now is also the title of the novel. And the brochure says, owning a lovely new home like this is your best insurance of a happy family now and in the formative years ahead. It gives you the right environment for raising children, gives them a sense of pride and security that makes them better citizens. Wow, that's a big promise to make to people. And I have to say that it's pretty ironic. I don't feel like most of the people who lived in that neighborhood were, feeling when they came out of it that they had the happiest lives they in the world. But in any case, that was what people thought they were signing up for or did sign up for. And I like starting with that. So here it goes. Let's see. Our National Homes subdivision was made up of 5 blocks of single-story, flat-face houses, like houses on a monopoly board. They were shingled in gray, tan, rust, mustard, and other drab colors. Ours was chocolate brown, trimmed in fern green. The only variety in design was the size and placement of the windows. Half picture windows to the right of the front door with two standard size windows on the left, like our house, or full picture windows to the right with two half size set high on the right. Some had special features: shutters, window boxes, louvered panels beneath the picture window, the smaller ones set into wood panels, painted trim color. Ours had a small white cupola over the front door, held up by 2x4s, and on one side, a green wood panel topped by a decorative X made of two 2x4s that made the concrete slab at the entrance seem a little more like a porch. There were kids everywhere, family after family of 4, sometimes 5 or 6 kids squeezed into the houses that were so close together you could hear them squabbling next door if the windows were open. There were more than 50 on our block alone, new ones regularly arriving. Scrawny maple trees grew in the narrow strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. We'd watch from the window when a bulldozer came through and graded the yards, followed by trucks laying grass seed. When that was done, flatbed trucks loaded with trees slowly made their way up the block, men grabbing and planting them, 2 per house, in what looked like a kind of dance. There was a swamp where our block dead ended, and I had to walk past it down a creepy dirt path, woods on one side and a cornfield with snakes in it on the other, to get to the street that would take me to school, or eventually, when I was old enough, to a bus stop. We moved there from a red 2-story rental house in a city neighborhood where there were big shade trees, all different kinds of houses and railroad tracks, where I sometimes found fat pieces of chalk used to mark the boxcars. There was a scary old lady whose house it had been exhilarating to run past screaming. Next door neighbors with deep Southern accents, Denver and Willie, and their 2 daughters, Carol and Janice, on whose porch I spent endless hours just to listen to them talking. It was an easy walk to the library, a park, a dime store, a drugstore, and a corner store where I could buy penny candy with the change from whatever last minute thing my mom sent me for. To my grandparents' house across the tracks, to my school, which I loved and where I was one of the smartest kids in the class. My parents tried to buy the house, but the owner, a friend of my dad's, said they should buy one of the new houses going up everywhere, and they were such a great deal for veterans. Next thing I know, my parents showed us kids a brochure with drawings of happy families who lived in houses that all looked pretty much the same. Men in Bermuda shorts mowing the lawns, aproned housewives in gleaming kitchens, perfect little girls with dolls, perfect little boys in cowboy hats. I was dismayed when my father pointed to one of the houses and said, "This is what ours will be like." We were moving? Worse, it turned out. We were moving to the middle of nowhere. I felt half sick every time we drove out to the building site, the city unraveling behind us. Streets had been laid down where cornfields had been. There were gray concrete slabs laid out in long rows like gravestones. Piles of room-sized panels, plywood flooring, roof sections, window frames, and packets of shingle set like the neat kits they were in front of the houses in progress. And as skeletons of houses marched up what would be our street, the skeleton that would be our house, called a Fairfield model, became one of them. They seemed so small. How could whole families live in the houses that would be built on them, I wondered. When our house was finished in the late summer and we moved in, I felt banished from my own life. That's just memory, as I remember that it happened. Here's where it began to morph into fiction. And this is what I just read you will be, or if I still decide I'm going to write an essay, that's the beginning of an essay. But when you're writing a novel, you kind of have to jump in and get people's interest right away. And so I decided to start with the arrival of the English aunt. My mother was a war bride, thus the English aunt. Aunt Ivy stepped off the Greyhound bus from Atlanta and fell into my mother's arms, her squirming baby squashed between them, howling. She looked tragic, as I had known she would. Icy pink lipstick smudged, her eye makeup dissolved into black circles around her eyes, her turquoise blue spring coat useless against the falling snow. There'd been a frantic long-distance phone call the night before last. Her cracker husband, that's what my dad called him, had hit her, and it wasn't the first time. She couldn't stay with him in that godforsaken town another minute. Could she please come and stay with us until she could get a divorce? Now, here she was. Aunt Ivy handed her little boy Dale to my mom, then turned to us kids, all standing in a row before her in our best clothes. Oh, look at you, lovely, lovely children, she said in her thrilling English accent. And you, me, she meant. She put a hand to her mouth, astonished. Blimey, I haven't seen you since you were as little as Dale, and I carried you around to the park. And here you are, practically a teenager. She wrapped her arms around me and I hugged her back, though I wasn't a hugger at all, lightheaded at the scent of roses and cigarettes. I was Ivy too, named for her. I had traveled to England on the Queen Mary with my mom when I was 2, which in my mind set me apart from my brothers and sisters. Of course she would think I was special. She climbed into the back seat of the car after me, which meant my brother got to sit in the front seat. Normally, I'd have been furious. I was the oldest. Plus, I was in the middle. Rosie had the other window seat, but I didn't care. Dale had stopped screaming and looked curiously about him, smiling at us and babbling in what I was certain was an English accent. Can I hold him, please? I asked. Aunt Ivy handed him to me, beaming. Fat and blonde with big blue eyes, Dale regarded me for a long moment, then smacked me on the face with a wet kiss. There, Aunt Ivy said, he loves you already, doesn't he? We got to McDonald's and ate in the car. We got McDonald's and ate in our car, which we almost never did. And breathing in the aroma of burgers and fries, it seemed to me I had never been so happy. I couldn't wait for my best friend Cheryl to meet her. I adored your mom, she told us kids as we drove toward home. She looked so smart in her WAF uniform, and your dad was ever so handsome, always with a chocolate bar in his pocket for me. My heart was broken when they left. I made up my mind right then to marry a soldier and come to America myself. She sighed, as if suddenly remembering what she had imagined her American life would be like when she married Dale's father. Maybe she felt the same when we turned into our subdivision of national homes, because suddenly she got quiet. Her adored big sister and her handsome GI had ended up here. 5 blocks of flat-faced, drab-colored houses, like houses on a Monopoly board. Ours was chocolate brown, trimmed in vern green, with a half-picture window on the right, 2 regular-sized windows on the left. Its special feature was a small white cupola over the front door, held up by 2 4x4s, on one side, a green panel topped by a decorative X that was supposed to make the concrete slab at the entrance seem more like a porch. There were kids everywhere, family after family of 4, sometimes 5 or 6 kids squeezed into houses that were so close together you could hear them squabbling next door if the windows were open. Word had gotten around that our English aunt was coming, so a lot of them were standing in their yards gawking as we pulled into the driveway. Others spied from between barely parted curtains. I was embarrassed for us. I wished for the millionth time that we'd never moved to this stupid subdivision from our old neighborhood in the city, where there were all kinds of houses and big shade trees, an easy walk to the library, a park, a dime store, a drugstore. I wished I could show Aunt Ivy all that, and maybe she'd treat me to a milkshake at the soda fountain, just the 2 of us. So you can see that I'm using real things from the essay, things that I actually remember. There are also made up things there because my aunt did not arrive in that way. Her child was a little older than that, and there are, some other kinds of things. The farther I get into fiction, the less I will be using real material, and I'll be making things up, because my Aunt Ivy won't be my real aunt. The I in the story, Ivy, which is sort of me, but it won't be me in the end, because different things are going to happen to Ivy than happen to me. And that's the pleasure of fiction. In some ways, you can rewrite things, most of all, you can just look at them. You can look at things that happened in your life, play them out in different kinds of way. it could have happened this way. It could have happened another way. But there's a moment where the real lifts off and becomes a story. And I have to say, it's one of the most exciting moments in the world when that happens. And you sort of get the string that you can follow through to the end of a novel. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to make a lot of revisions along the way. You will, sometimes huge ones, structural ones that take a lot of time and wrestling, but have to say I find it really the most amazing and wonderful process in the world. I'm sorry I won't be able to be on Instagram to answer questions because I'll be on the road on my way to a vacation, which I'm pretty excited about. But if you have questions and you want to message me on Facebook, I'd be glad to answer them. Thanks for listening. Bye.